Are you going to optimize your health? Are you looking to get the best supplements at the lowest price? For high quality supplements and to talk to someone about what supplements are best for you, go to takeyoursupplements.com and one of our fantastic True Health coaches will help you pick out the right supplements for you that are the highest quality and the best price. That's takeyoursupplements.com. takeyoursupplements.com. That's takeyoursupplements.com. Be sure to ask about free shipping and our awesome referral program. Welcome to the Learn True Health podcast. I'm your host, Ashley James. This is episode 354. I am so excited to have Dr. Jennifer Bahr, naturopathic physician, on the show today. I've been waiting for months and months to get her to come on the show, and finally our schedules aligned. Welcome, Dr. Bahr.
Thank you. I'm so glad that we finally figured this out too. It's been a while. It's been a long time coming.
Absolutely. So you specialize in helping families and helping children with PANS and PANDAS. And we're going to define what that is in a sec, because up to a few months ago, I had never heard of this. And one of my good friends told me that her daughter was finally diagnosed after years of very strange symptoms. She was diagnosed with PANDAS. And I'm like, is that a thing? Like PANDAS? Your daughter has PANDAS? Like, she was just like typing to me, my daughter has PANDAS. And I'm like, you're typing to me like I should know that. And I've never heard of that.
Like an infestation of acute cuddly bear? What?
Right,
what
exactly.
Is this?
I'm like, okay, your daughter has PANDAS. Like, what does that even mean? And then she was enlightening me, and I am blown away that there's this entire diagnosis that so many children have gone undiagnosed and or misdiagnosed and are on all kinds of medications. And finally now, you being a major expert in this field are helping to clear the path towards clarity and showing people how they can use natural medicine to help their children come back into balance and heal. My friend said you absolutely have to get into Dr. Jennifer Bahr's Facebook group. And so we're going to let parents know right now, search homeopathy for PANDAS in Facebook to join the free group. It's a fantastic group. I've been in it for a while, and I love the advice and information that's there. And you're a pioneer in this field. So I'm very excited to bring you here today for the listeners. I asked the listeners in my Facebook group, the Learn True Health Facebook group, if they have any questions for you. And so far we have about 12 questions of parents with PANS, children with PANS or PANDAS, asking questions. And so I'm going to have you answer them, as well as give us lots of great information today. But first, before we get into your story and what led you to want to become a naturopathic physician specializing in helping children with this issue, can you explain what is PANS and what is PANDAS?
Absolutely. I just want to make sure I clarify for the people who are looking for the group already. If you can't find it, it's homeopathy for PANS and PANDAS, and it's like rather than slash. And it's the and symbol for homeopathy for PANS and PANDAS. So PANS stands for Pediatric Acute Neuropsychiatric Syndrome, and PANDAS stands for Pediatric Autoimmune Neuropsychiatric Disorders Associated with Streptococcal Infections, which I'm sure clears everything up, right? No questions anymore, right? Just kidding. So basically what PANS and PANDAS is a form of PANS. So both conditions essentially have the same things. PANDAS is just a very specific type of PANS. So what happens with these kids is they get exposed to an infection. In PANDAS, it happens to be strep. PANS, it can be many different things. It can be Lyme. It can be any other co-infections associated with Lyme, like Bartonella. It could be mold toxicity. It could be mycoplasma, which can typically cause pneumonia, or other environmental toxins. So it's not a defined cause, whereas PANDAS is defined cause of strep infections. So they get exposed to this infection in most cases. It's usually an infection. And then they get a sudden onset of obsessive compulsive disorder and tics changes in their urination, basically kids who've been potty trained for years, even teens who have no problems with urinary control, suddenly wetting the bed at night, having to go to the restroom 10 times in an hour, changes in handwriting, significant changes in behavior, a lot of insomnia, rage will come out, a lot of separation anxiety too. So basically people will feel like they lost their child overnight. Parents will oftentimes compare it to like their child becoming possessed almost, because they just are very different. There's even changes in how they look. A lot of these kids will end up getting very pale. They'll have the dark circles around their eyes. They'll have really dilated pupils, and they just almost like look through their parents when they're dealing with some of these episodes that they go through. So does that clear things up a little bit more without getting too far into the weeds?
Yeah, it does. Is it an autoimmune condition?
Yeah, so it's still really being studied. It's a challenging diagnosis for people to deal with, and we can talk about this as much detail as you need to, just to help people understand that, like, what they're going to face if this sounds like something that their child might be experiencing, and they want to go to their pediatrician. Oh, I heard about this PANS or PANDAS. Is this what's going on with my kid? Unfortunately, it's a newly understood phenomenon. As recently as 1998 is when it was really first defined, and then because of that, there's a lot of controversy around its legitimacy as a diagnosis. So medical science takes a long time to catch up to research, and medical practice takes a long time to catch up to research, because everybody's got to redo things, and who's right and who's wrong, and all of that. So it's believed right now to be an autoimmune response to strep. So basically what can happen, or any of the other conditions in PANS. So basically what happens is that our body gets exposed to this invading pathogen, and it tries to mount an immune response. And what happens in autoimmunity is that our immune response gets too broad. And so rather than just attacking the pathogen itself, it starts to attack our own cells. Strep is really tricky because it can actually undertake this thing called molecular mimicry. So we've got these little proteins that are on the surface of all of our cells that identify us as us, so that our immune system, when it goes out to attack cells, it doesn't attack our own cells. What strep will do is it actually puts proteins on its surface that look similar to our proteins. So it's almost like putting on a mask of us, so that it's trying to hide from our immune system. And because of this, the immune system will recognize it. I always say, like you can tell if somebody's wearing a mask of you and that it's not you, right? Your immune system can also tell that masked strep bacteria is not really you. And so it starts to attack the strep bacteria, but in that effort, it broadens its attack, and it ends up attacking its own cells. So it is an autoimmune attack on the nervous system as a result of the infection. And strep has been known to be able to do this for years. That's one reason that we have to get strep treated really pretty early, is if we don't get it addressed, usually within 4 days of onset, we can have an autoimmune response both in our heart and our kidneys as well. So this is not a new thing, just this particular presentation of it has been shown to be more prominent here recently, and more defined here recently.
That's very interesting. When I was in college, I was studying pathology, and they said, pop quiz, why, and I'm from Canada. I live in the States now, but in Canada, socialized medicine. Why is it that if a child with a broken arm and a child with strep comes into the ER, why is the child with strep chosen first? Because everyone's thinking, well, the kid, with the broken arm should go first. Like, and they said, no, it's like, we've got to treat strep as fast as possible because it can damage the heart. And this is, back in the 90s, information that they were teaching. And so it's interesting that, that we've known that strep can do this, but the link to creating this autoimmune response, or and the neurological symptoms afterwards is fairly new, which is so weird because it's been going on for a long time.
It's not completely new. There's Sydenham's chorea, which we've known about for a long time, that can happen as a result of strep. And if people who get diagnosed with Sydenham's chorea, they end up on prophylactic antibiotics until they're 21. PANS and PANDAS, PANDAS specifically, is very similar to Sydenham's chorea. It has a lot of similarities in the tics and the movements. It's a little bit different. Like there's specific choreiform movements that happen with Sydenham's chorea. This is just a new manifestation, and I'm certain we'll get into lots of these details for like why this is happening. But I'm really as I'm exploring more and more, and I'm constantly learning more. This is one of those conditions that you never know enough. You're constantly learning more and more about things. But it really seems that it has a lot to do with our current lifestyle, our diet, our exposure to things in our environment. It's creating these like perfect soups that just cooks up this really dramatic response that is happening so much more commonly than it used to. Granted, I am a specialist in this. This is basically all I see in my practice anymore, is PANS and PANDAS. And so I do have a skewed perception, but I keep looking at this, and I talked to my husband who runs my practice, who, when I first started talking about PANS and PANDAS, he legitimately thought there was like 20 people in the country who had it. And he's like, I don't know why you want to reach out to these people more and help these people more. I think you're helping them already. Like, how many people really need this? And
Wow.
and when when we started the Facebook group at the request of one of the moms that I work with, he was floored by how many people joined the group so quickly, and he's just stunned at how many people are suffering from this. And I've been telling him all along. I was like, I think we're actually headed toward, not I hate to use this word loosely, but like an epidemic. In the way that autism has like dramatically increased. PANS and PANDAS has got a lot of overlap with autism too, and I'm seeing it just dramatically increasing. More and more kids having it. It used to be that one kid in a town would have a familiarity with it. And now it's like parents are telling me we've got multiple kids in a class that have it. So it's becoming a problem, and it's not just about the bugs. And I'm sure we'll talk all about that here in a little bit, but it's not the bugs, even though it sounds like it's the bugs. It's not the bugs.
Great segue into your story. I want to know. So first of all, what happened in your life that made you want to become a naturopathic physician? And then what happened that made you want to specialize in PANS and PANDAS when it only seemed like there was 20 people in the world that had it at the time?
All right. So looking back, there is a chance, and of course you can't guarantee anything in retrospect. Hindsight's 2020, but it's not even 2020 in this case, because you need lab tests and everything. There's actually a chance I might have had PANS or PANDAS when I was younger. I never got diagnosed with that. I did have some symptoms that are really common to PANS and PANDAS. So I guess potentially it started when I was like 8, when I had to get my tonsils taken out and I got pneumonia and suddenly started getting scared at night and having really intense fears about all the robbers and murderers that had never been caught somehow hiding in my room, just waiting for me to go to bed, and imagining that they were going to have some way to like stab me from underneath my bed or hurt me in the night sometime, or fears that the house was gonna catch on fire and I was gonna have to jump out. These constant intrusive thoughts that were really scary, and that would happen specifically at night. And I had some urinary issues that I'd never shared with anybody. So you're the first. I had random urinary issues when I was fully potty trained, and I was like 6 to 8 years old. And I don't recall having any tics, but I don't know for sure. The real definite time that I had my first interaction with anything in the mental health realm was when I was 16, and my mom made me go see a psychiatrist for depression. And I got put on medication, and the medication made me significantly worse. I was put on an SSRI, and it sent me through the roof. I went from being really genuinely, legitimately depressed. I was sleeping all the time, lost interest in hanging out with my friends. I'd quit dance, and I was a competitive dancer and loved it. And I'd quit, and I quit swim team. I quit all of these things and stopped turning in my homework. I was like a star student, and I basically stopped doing anything. So my mom took me to a doctor, and like I said, got put on an antidepressant. It was an SSRI, and quickly felt significantly better, but felt so much better that I wasn't really sleeping anymore. I was talking a mile a minute and basically had a lot of signs of hypomania and a lot of agitation. I took myself off of that medication after about 6 months because I was like, well, I'm not depressed anymore. Why on earth would I take an antidepressant? And proceeded to many more years of lots of ups and downs. Many, many ups and downs, and lots of impulsive behavior. Didn't like what I was doing at Ohio State University. I was studying chemical engineering, so I quit and joined the Navy. And then pretty impulsively, and then went out to California where I live now. I was up in Northern California because I went to the language school up there, learned Arabic, and then decided I wanted to be a doctor. So that stuck pretty shortly after I left my home state of Ohio and joined the Navy and got a little bit of freedom. I was able to say, okay, I do want to be a doctor. And then there was a lot of still ups and downs. I was an Arabic translator in the Navy for 6 years. And while I was doing that, this was from 1998 to 2004. So pretty high time for high demand for Arabic translators and people with security clearances working in Intel. So I did that while I was also going to school full time to get my undergraduate degree in physiology and neurobiology at the University of Maryland. So I was really, really busy, and I had lots of fluctuations in my mood during that time as well, and my ability to concentrate and think clearly. Sometimes I was laser sharp, and sometimes I felt really terrible. And I just sort of accepted, okay, I'm somebody who deals with depression, and so I'm going to have to continue to deal with this. But then it came to a head in November of 2003, and things got really, really, really bad. I got to the point that I was suicidal, but I knew that I was not going to be able to act on it. Especially with one night I went to bed after I'd taken a bunch of sleeping pills because it hurt too much to be awake, and I'd had a little bit of alcohol with it. And I thought, oh, maybe this will be a lethal combination. And it was comforting to think that maybe I wasn't going to wake up. I wasn't trying to commit suicide, but it was comforting to think that maybe that would have happened. And when I woke up and I was disappointed, I said, okay, I need help because I can't continue to live like this. And so I called the doctor and I got in really quickly. With the military. That rarely happens, but I was stubborn enough to refuse to go to the ER. So they made a way for me to come in and see the doctor the very next day. And that doctor ended up diagnosing me with bipolar disorder because I had a lot of history of really intense moods, really short sleep times, high energy, rapid thoughts, pressured speech, the typical signs that you see with mania or hypomania. And so he gave me that diagnosis. And when I was expecting to get put on an antidepressant, I instead got put on lithium. And lithium made me feel very slow and stupid. I ended up, unfortunately, this was, like I said, it was November of 2003. I was in my second to last semester at the University of Maryland, and I was taking the toughest class, the toughest biology class in our course of study for the physiology and neurobiology. And I got my first ever D. And this was really hard for me. I was a student who was used to getting mostly A's and an occasional B. And I got a D. So I actually had to retake that class. And in part, it's because of what I was going through emotionally. And in part, it's because my brain just would not work on that medication. I ended up gaining a bunch of weight on it, ended up messing up my thyroid, like lots and lots of issues. So as I was finishing up, I had a lot of thoughts to myself. I succumbed to the stigma. There's still an awful lot of stigma around mental health. And this was years and years ago. And I was in the military, where we also are basically taught you don't get help for mental health reasons because you'll lose your job. Fortunately, I didn't lose my job, and I never did. I actually continued to work in the Intel world for another 4 years while I was figuring out what naturopathic medicine was and my route to get there. Fortunately, I was not subject to losing my clearance and losing my job because I had the insight to get help. And that's really one thing that's important for people to recognize is it's about getting help. Even when there's stigma, when you get help, when you can have that insight, it has significantly less impact on you than it might otherwise if you don't seek the help in the first place. So I was fortunate enough that I was able to finish out my time in the military, and I did pass, obviously, my class when I took it again. But then with that stigma, I was still had that feeling like I was broken and there was something wrong with me. And how could I possibly be a doctor if I couldn't rely on my brain? If somebody was telling me that those times that I felt my best, when I was my sharpest, when I was on my game, I could think clearly, had lots of energy, was the center of attention, having lots of fun, that was me when I was sick. That really gave me pause to have me ask myself, is this really what you should be doing? can you be trusted? Can other people trust you? Like, can you trust yourself? So it took a lot of time, and I just stayed in that field where I was translating Arabic for another couple of years, deciding what I was going to do. And I was contemplating psychology because I still really wanted to help people, and I was even more drawn to help people with mental health conditions after my own personal experience, where I was misdiagnosed and then given medications that didn't make me feel great, honestly. Like I did adjust to them so I didn't feel stoned all the time on lithium after about a month or two, but I never felt great. I didn't feel the highs and the lows anymore, but I didn't feel anything. It was just dull and flat and gray. And I wasn't myself anymore. And so I didn't really want to get into the field that I was planning on going into, which was psychiatry, because I didn't want to be somebody whose tool was to have people take pills that made people less burdensome to those around them, but made them less of themselves at the same time. So I thought about doing psychology, and then that felt just far too passive for me. And then my own experience with not only the medications, but just the medical realm in general. I remember going to see my primary care doctor for something completely different, not related to my mental health, just like an injury from doing too many push-ups in a Krav Maga class, actually, where they gave me a medication that I knew was contraindicated, considering the fact that I was on lithium. And the doctor didn't listen to me and told me to take it anyway. And it was the insurance company that called me. Where is the medical system when your insurance company is looking out for your best interest more than your doctor? The insurance company called me and said, hey, we just saw that you had both of these medications. You can't take them together. You need to stop this naproxen and call your doctor. And then 2 hours later, the nurse from the doctor's office called me and said, hey, we need you to stop taking that. And I said, I told the doctor that when I was in the office. Why didn't he listen to me? And the nurse said, I'm really sorry. I don't know why, but please stop taking it. And that's when I said, okay, there's something broken. There's something wrong here. So I decided, okay, I can't fix the system if I'm not part of it. I was always wanting to, not always, but ever since I was, 19, I've been wanting to be a doctor. I've gone through all of this training in my undergrad. I can still do this. I'm stable. I can manage this. It's more about being treated. As long as you're treated, it's fine. And have that cognizance to maintain treatment. And so I started researching and started studying for my MCAT and figuring out ways that I could learn to do psychiatry, but to use more natural approaches. And I was expecting that I was going to have to do my traditional conventional medical training and then do lots of traveling throughout the world to learn Ayurvedic medicine and herbs and nutrition and all these other things that just aren't taught in a conventional program. And it was 2 weeks before I took my MCAT, I read an article written by an ND, and I'd never even heard of a naturopathic doctor at this point. And I was like, what is this ND? Did somebody just make up this ending to give them more legitimacy than they actually have? So I hit Google and saw so ND stands for naturopathic physician. Well, what is that? And as I'm reading, I'm like, it actually combines the conventional and natural. And it's a program that does this in 4 years instead of 10 plus. And I was like, oh my gosh, then the light bulb went off. This is what I'm trying to do. And it already exists. I don't have to piecemeal this. So it was from there that I started taking a look into it and researching more about it, and applied to a couple of different schools, and ended up going to the school that I landed on that explained what naturopathic medicine was in the first place. So that's how I got to naturopathic medicine. And obviously mental health was always my passion because of my own experience. I'm driven to help people that I can relate to, and it took me a while to feel comfortable sharing my story because, I still had that feeling if I share with people, they're going to think that they can't trust me, that I shouldn't be a doctor, I'll lose my license, or any of these things. And it ended up being the most freeing thing that I ever did when I finally made that decision to share, because yes, if people are going to think that, and occasionally people have thought that I am not the right person for them or for their partner or whatever, because they have their own judgments about, quote unquote crazy. But when people get to know me, they see that, one, I'm actually really stable. Two, the medicines that I use for my patients actually help me recover from whatever it was, whether it was an accurate diagnosis of bipolar disorder or if it was something else going on, leading back all the way to all the things that I dealt with when I was a child, when I was anxious and scared and rageful. I forgot to even tell you, I punched holes in walls. Like I was that kid. I was an angry, rage-filled kid too, which is a lot of what we see in PANS and PANDAS. So regardless of what it is, I use the same type of medicine and the same approaches for myself and working with my doctors that I now use for my patients.
What school did you go to?
I went to Southwest College of Naturopathic Medicine in Tempe, Arizona. I was between that and Bastyr University, and it was completely serendipitous that I ended up at SCNM. Bastyr has a reputation as being one of the best schools, in part just because of its longevity in the community or in the world. It's been around it's one of the longer programs. And they just have a lot of really great marketing. I'm really grateful that it was the sun that drew me to Arizona, because the homeopathy program at SCNM is significantly stronger than the homeopathy program at Bastyr. And I'll tell you, I mean, with the homeopathy part too, I was not a fan of homeopathy when I first found out about it as being part of the program. So that's actually probably worth talking about, because homeopathy uses really infinitesimally small doses of single substances found in nature. And it's given to people based off of the symptoms that they're experiencing, that the substance, if used in a high dose, could cause in a healthy person. So if somebody is sick and they're experiencing symptoms similar to what a substance could cause in an unhealthy person, in a healthy person, then that medicine is used to actually cure, quote unquote, cure those symptoms in the unhealthy person. Does that make sense? I was a little convoluted there.
Yeah, no, actually, and we've had a few guests on the show about homeopathy, and I always share that I'm like the most open-minded skeptic. So I'm going to question everything, but I'm open-minded enough to try it. And I found out I was pregnant because I had the worst, it's not morning sickness when it's 24 hours a day.
Hyperemesis gravidarum.
Yeah, I had that
Yeah.
all the time. And we didn't know we were pregnant. Like we weren't, because I was told I was infertile. This is long story. I won't get into it now, but I've told it before on the show. But basically, using natural medicine, we got our fertility, or I got my fertility. And so surprise, I was pregnant, and I had a migraine, nausea, vomiting, a fever, shaking, blurred vision. I felt like I had a flu. I was incredibly sick, and I was in so much pain, and we were on a business road trip. And I was in so much pain from the car sickness and from everything that I was like, screw it, I'm taking Advil. And I told my husband, pull over to the Safeway. I mean, I don't ever take NSAIDs or anything, but I was in so much pain. And you know, when you're in pain, you're like, I will do anything, right? So in the back of my mind, this little voice said, go take a pregnancy test before you take Advil, because if you're pregnant, you really don't want to be taking Advil. And I'm thinking to myself, there's like a 1% chance I'm pregnant because I'm infertile. Like I had polycystic ovarian syndrome, right? But I, of course, was using natural medicine and changed my diet and lifestyle and everything. And so I was correcting all my health issues. And I thought, okay, well, 1% chance, fine. So I grabbed a pregnancy test, and before I grabbed the Advil, and I came out running and screaming and jumping through the air at my husband. Suddenly all my symptoms seemed to disappear because I couldn't believe I was bawling. I was crying and screaming. I was so happy, staring at the little positive mark on the pregnancy test. And that was like the happiest day of my life. But I was also incredibly miserable, incredibly sick. And luckily at the time we were we were actually hosting a naturopathic physician to give a health talk. And he looked at me and he figured out what my constitutional was, and he said, okay, we got to go get this homeopathy for you. And I'm like, again, I'll try anything. I can't try Advil now. So I gotta try something natural. I took it. And so I didn't have like the placebo effect, because I'm like, whatever, I'll take anything. But within 90 seconds, my symptoms cut down so much that I could open my eyes. I could walk again. The headache cleared up to like just like a 1 out of 10 pain from like a 10 out of 10. I stopped feeling nauseous and vomiting. Like it was incredible. And he said, you're going to have to take that your whole pregnancy. Like every time you start feeling bad, take some. And it was like clockwork. I couldn't believe it. And then again, our son, he had colic, and I tried everything, and the only thing that worked was homeopathy. And I'm like, if a 1 week old or a 1 month old baby who has no idea what you're putting in its mouth, its symptoms start to get better when you put homeopathy in its mouth, then how is it a placebo effect? So anyways, this is
Right.
I love homeopathy, but you have to use the right remedy. If you use the
Yes.
wrong remedy, nothing happens. Luckily, there's no like, it's like not, it's not like a side effects, right? You use the wrong medication and your insurance company calls you up. But
Right.
you use
For
the
the
wrong,
most part. For
right.
the most part,
Yeah,
yes.
so homeopathy is significantly more safer, but you got to work with an expert because there's like what 2 or 3 thousand different choices when it comes to
Yeah.
homeopathy, and different strengths and different ways of taking it, and we've got to work with an expert. You can't just like walk into the drugstore and look at what, oh, this one says it's good for colds, I'll just take this
Yeah.
one.
Or ask in a group and mom says this one was miracle for my kid and okay, so I'm going to do that too. Like it's not necessarily going to work for your kid because your kid's different. Everybody's different.
Yeah, exactly. So we got to work with an expert, and that's why I'm really glad to hear that you felt that your homeopathy training was the strongest
Yeah.
at the naturopathic university that you went to.
Yeah, it's and I still think it is. The school here in San Diego has an awful lot of people who are in the homeopathy realm and teaching homeopathy who were trained at SCNM at the school I went to. So it's also got a pretty strong program in the San Diego campus here too. Although I still think that the SCNM's program is stronger. It's just got more legs.
When you say San Diego, are you referring to the Bastyr?
Oh yes, the Bastyr branch in San Diego. Yes, yeah, Bastyr University in San Diego. So it sounds like you and I actually had a similar introduction to homeopathy because I was super, super, super skeptical. So I was so skeptical when I found out about it, when I had to take it as one of my lectures in my first quarter at SCNM. I almost quit because I was like, are you kidding me? This complete nonsense quackery medicine is part of my required training as a physician. Are you kidding? Like, there's no way I'm ever going to use this. I'm going to give my patients nothing and help them get better. Like, this is magical thinking nonsense. Like, no, I'm never going to use this. And legitimately almost quit because I started to look down on the program that had included it. Um, and then I decided to just focus on the things that I thought were more legitimate. And I was like, I'll do this. Everything is imperfect in life. And so I will take this imperfection and I will run with it and ignore it and focus on the things that I think are useful. And then I met my first doctor that I worked with at a conference who had a lot of experience treating specifically bipolar disorder. And it was the perfect timing because I wanted to get pregnant, or I wanted the option to get pregnant. So I was finally in this place and I'm like, okay, I'm old enough. I'm in that trajectory toward the last stages of school. Like after this, I'm done with school and I want the option to get pregnant in the future. But none of the medications that you're taking with bipolar disorder are safe in pregnancy. None.
Mm.
And most of the psychotropic medications are not known for sure to be safe in pregnancy. There's a lot of complications, even with the ones that are considered pregnancy category B, which is basically the safest you can get, meaning that it's not guaranteed safe, but it's not got a lot of evidence of harm. There's still things that come out for the babies. They get born with withdrawal symptoms from SSRIs if they're taken when mom is pregnant. But absolutely none of the medications I could take to manage bipolar disorder were allowed in pregnancy. It could cause birth defects or fetal death. And so I went to my psychiatrist and I said, so what are my options if I want to have a baby? And he looked me square in the eye and told me I would have to get shock therapy if I wanted to have a baby. And I was like, well, that is nonsense. So I'm going to go try this other thing that's also nonsense, but doesn't require hooking electrodes to my brain and shooting electricity through my brain and scrambling it. Like, I'm going to try this other thing. And if it doesn't work, I'll come back to the meds and I can always go fry my brain later if that's what I feel like I need to do. And I'm so glad that I had that because I had a similar experience. So I was on medication when I started working with my doctor who was prescribing me a constitutional homeopathic remedy. And me being the skeptical scientist that I am, I decided that it was no way I could know. He insisted that the remedy was working. I said, there's no way I can possibly know that this is working because I'm on suppressive medications. So I impulsively stopped my medications, which you should never do. It is a bad idea. It can cause a lot of headaches and a lot of negative repercussions. And so don't do what I did. I was a very bad patient and bad idea for anybody to do. Don't follow me. Do as I say, not as I do. And I ended up manic out of my mind within a few weeks of stopping the medication. And fortunately, the remedy was working, and I got the clear evidence that it was working because my doctor at the time didn't have me taking a daily dose. He had me taking single doses. So we would have a follow-up every 2 to 3 weeks, and then he would tell me whether or not I needed to take another dose of the remedy. He usually did have me take another dose. Well, we were very fortunate that the day I became floridly manic, we already had an appointment scheduled because I was not aware that I was manic. I was just feeling all of the things and feeling really good about feeling all of the things again. Probably could have been a hint that I was not able to sit still. I was, marching around in class in the back like a crazy person who was manic, because I was. And so my doctor told me to take another dose of the remedy. And within 2 hours, I was able to go out to dinner with my friends and sit still and have a normal paced conversation, and no longer felt like I needed to get a tattoo right now and run away to Nicaragua and start this crazy new life. So that was my magical moment where I said, okay, if this can actually pull me down, where medications would never have done it that fast. If I'd started taking my lithium again, it would have taken weeks, and I wouldn't have felt better, but still me. I would have felt not manic, but I would have felt dull and slow, and it would have taken weeks to get there. So that was when I had my moment, and I said, okay, I guess this stuff works. And just like you, I did not expect it to work. So I was like, okay, I guess I have to learn how to do this. And so that's how I came to homeopathy. And then PANS and PANDAS came to me when I had good success treating it, because ultimately when we're dealing with PANS and PANDAS, it looks like a psychiatric and a neurological condition. So people were seeking out somebody to help with OCD and tics. And in fact, the first case that I had of PANS and PANDAS was somebody who just thought it was Tourette's syndrome and OCD, who'd been misdiagnosed, which happens so frequently, right? Her child had been misdiagnosed, and fortunately in naturopathic medical school, we're taught about PANS and PANDAS. And so I was able to catch it and figure out what it was. And fortunately, homeopathy was all that was needed for this little girl to get her back on track. But then obviously, once you get good results for something that's a hard to treat condition, more people come to you and come and come and come. And so that I just kept seeing more and more people, and really seeing that ultimately, in my experience, for people to have full, true resolution, which is actually possible. People will tell you that it's not possible, that you're always going to have this, just like, with any other mental health condition. It's with you for life. This is going to be what your kids are dealing with for at least until they're 21 or 18 or some random age when it's apparently your immune system knows, okay, I can drink now. So that means I'm an adult. So I'm going to change the way I'm responding to things. Not true. But we can actually see these kids recover to the point that not only are their symptoms controlled, and not just controlled, but they're gone, and that they can get exposed to the things that were the triggers in the past and not have a flare of these neuropsychiatric symptoms. And the only way that I've seen this actually happen for people is using homeopathy. And so it's really become my drive and my passion, and why it's the only thing that I really see in my practice anymore is PANS and PANDAS, is because these kids just don't recover. And I unless you use homeopathy. And when I went into naturopathic medicine and working with people within the mental health realm, I was always drawn to working with kids, because as much I love my mother, she did the best that she could. She got me to a doctor when she knew that I needed it, and she did what she had information for. And my mother is absolutely to credit for the fact that I'm here now, and that I am as healthy as I am now, and everything. And if my mom had more information and had been able to find a doctor to treat me the way I treat my patients, when I was as young as 6 or 7, when the first thing started coming up, I might have had a lot less headache and a lot less heartache through my adult life and through some really formative years, which granted, and now I'm very grateful for, because they led me here to what I'm doing. And it really was not pleasant at the time. So I was always driven to help kids, because I wanted to prevent them from dealing with what I had to deal with growing up. And who better to help than these kids who the conventional system only has limited solutions for. They're still dealing with a lot of stuff. It doesn't actually help them recover. And this type of medicine can actually help them recover.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. I love your story because it does show that we can look back and be really appreciative of the hard times. If, if you hadn't been put on the lithium, if you hadn't been, those little things that didn't seem as significant, but now you look back and you realize that was the pivotal moment that had me go in this direction and then had me find, naturopathy, and then had me find, ultimately had you, just everything, all these little dominoes, right, that don't seem clear in the moment, but we can go back and look back and appreciate what has happened in our life, the good and the bad, to shape us into who we are now, and how you're contributing to the world. Because if your mom had done if your mom had sent you to a homeopath back when you were 6, you may not be helping hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of children now.
Right.
So it's that wonderful karma, that has us, that we sometimes are suffering. We can turn our suffering into help heal thousands of people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I really love that.
Yeah, my practice name is Resilience Naturopathic, and it's exactly because of that. It's because every obstacle that we face can lead to so much transformative change and so much transformative good if we just allow it. And so I'm fortunately an eternal optimist. I'm a pessimist for the very first minute of something, so I can figure out the worst case scenario, and then I go back to my optimistic place. And if it weren't for that, I wouldn't have been able to see all of the opportunities that all of the suffering and what could have been tragedies opened up for me. And ways that I'm able to connect and relate. It helps me when I'm talking to the moms. It helps me when I'm talking to my patients, because they suddenly don't feel as embarrassed when I can tell them how many holes have you punched in a wall when you got really mad, and when they say none, I'm like, I did it 4 times, and they're like, oh, okay. Then they feel like they can talk to me in a way that I'm not going to judge them because I did it too. So why would I think bad things about them? And so it's really actually a gift. And I think it's made me a significantly better doctor and even a more relatable doctor to people as well. So it just really increases the therapeutic relationship. And if people don't like the fact that I've had my own experiences, then I'm not the right person for them. And that's
Right.
all. That's all good.
I think I've said this on a recent interview. I would rather go to a doctor who has been sick in their past than go to a doctor who's never been sick, because how can they possibly relate? It's like going to a personal trainer who's never worked out or something,
Yeah.
right? It's like you
A
want to
weight
go
loss coach who's always been thin.
right. You want to work with someone who has that personal experience. They have so much more empathy. And also they personally will have dived into this subject and become even more of an expert because they're looking at helping themselves, right? So I absolutely love that you have the past you have. It has helped shape who you are as a doctor and give you the amount of compassion, but also the amount of observation that you probably see things that other doctors don't. That you observe things in your patients. Can adults develop PANS or PANDAS, or is this only something that is developed as a child?
So it's developed as a child because that's when we're most susceptible to PANS and PANDAS, but it's not just for kids. So I've got a handful of adults in my practice that I'm pretty certain had PANS or PANDAS as a child and were misdiagnosed. And we've got adults that can still get strep. So typically, if you're going to have an autoimmune response, it's going to start in childhood, but not always, because as I said earlier, it's a cascade of events and like a soup that sort of all the ingredients come together to create the perfect situation that can lead to that susceptibility or to trigger that susceptibility. So it's rare that we see adults develop PANS or PANDAS out of nowhere, but it's absolutely possible that people who are adults have PANS and PANDAS that was never correctly identified when they were children.
So a friend of mine who first told me about PANDAS because her daughter was diagnosed, this is a very sad and ongoing story. She's currently living in Texas, and I believe I've known her since her daughter was 5, and her daughter is gosh, 12 or 13 right now. So I've known her for a long time, and we've been close friends. I've observed her as a mother. She homeschools. Her child was incredibly healthy before
Mhm.
getting this. She's been gluten-free, organic, basically paleo diet, very athletic, many, many grades above her age, incredibly intelligent, and homeschooled, so she gets all the personalized attention, but lots of socialization. Just like when I met her when she was 6, she acted like she was 10. She was reading the Harry Potter novels, all of them. Very intelligent, well-spoken. And then she developed pandas in the recent years and started to get tics, very strange behavior changes, couldn't focus, couldn't concentrate, couldn't look people in the eye, started having seizures, would couldn't remember waking up in the night having eaten food. They would find food like a roast dragged into another room and just find it like on the bathroom floor or something. You know, they'd find half-eaten food in places. They'd even find frozen meat eaten. And the
Mm.
daughter has no memory of this. She would basically wake up in the middle of the night and eat and have no memory of this. So they were living in Texas, and the mom found a pediatric neurologist who figured out that she had a brain infection and got her on antibiotics, and then got her on anti-seizure medication, which was very strong and had its own side of symptoms. And so this is what, as the mom's trying to figure out what's going on, and this is when she discovered that she has pandas. Well, she had a really bad episode and took her daughter to the emergency room, and the hospital didn't believe that her daughter was sick, believed that the mother had made everything up in her head, and that her mother was one of those parents who pretends their children are sick for attention.
Munchausen by proxy. Yep.
They took her daughter away from her, put her in a psychiatric ward, even though that she was on anti-seizure medications with brain scans to prove, and working with a neurological pediatric neurologist. They ignored that. They got CPS involved, and CPS took her daughter away. And to this day, her daughter is out of her custody. They're trying to battle it, but it's very hard on them. And they immediately vaccinated the child with all the vaccines at once.
Oh
Put
my
her in
gosh.
put her in public school. She is having bowel and urinary problems. She's having tics and seizures, and she just had pneumonia. And the mother only like can visit her once or twice a week, and she's not allowed to have any control of her medical, anything medical.
But she sounds like she's getting worse. So
She's getting, oh yeah, no, she's absolutely getting worse. But because the CPS brought in, expert doctors to say that this is BS, there's no such thing as PANS and PANDAS, your daughter, it doesn't have it. And they are disregarding everything. They're saying the mother was abusive to the daughter because the mother made up a diagnosis.
I wish that this was the first time I was hearing a story like this, and it's like crushing my heart. But
I want to warn the parents that if this can happen to a mother who I have known, she has never been abusive. She's only been loving, and she's doing the best she can. And when you take your kid to and I'm not saying don't take your kid to the ER if they need to. Like, please don't withhold medical help, but go to the right doctors, say the right things. If they don't have a respect for the diagnosis, they might try to take your kid away. I mean, this happened to one of my close friends and is still happening. So it's medical kidnapping. And of course the system wants to protect the children, but is this really protecting children, taking them away from the caregiver that cares about them the most? So we need to be very careful and walk a fine line. We need to do, obviously get many people on our medical team, have many pediatricians, have many experts, seek the advice of many doctors, including Dr. Jennifer Bahr, who's absolutely amazing in this arena. But we need to have many doctors on our side to make sure that we're covering all our bases. And so unfortunately this is happening to my friend, but this is the very sad story that led me to learn about pans and pandas and led me to ask you to be on the show. And again, like what we just said about, we can look back in a few years. We will look back, and even though this is incredibly difficult and sad, hopefully in a few years we can look back and be grateful that this story and what my friend and her daughter went through, they're able to turn this into something positive, and that we all can turn this into something positive.
Here's hoping. Here's hoping.
So you've heard about this kind of story before?
Yes, I have. Unfortunately, it's one of the biggest challenges that we're facing in this community and that these parents face is that there aren't enough doctors who are familiar with it, even aware of it. There's definitely doctors who are aware of it and think that it's baloney, like apparently her emergency physician thought, and the expert witness thought. So one of the challenges that we face is that we've got experts. We do have experts who treat this and who use various different types of medicines. There's a lot of integrative immunologists and functional immunologists that refer to me or that I have patients in common with. Same thing with neurologists. Some of the best doctors with PANS and PANDAS, or some of the most highly respected doctors for PANS and PANDAS, are not fans of integrative medicine or homeopathy, and they'll actually try to steer their patients away. Fortunately, PANS and PANDAS moms are really strong mama bears. They earn that moniker for sure. And they will do what they feel is right and best for their kids. And they won't stop fighting for their kids and to make sure that they get a solution. And they'll lean on each other and they'll support each other. That's one really positive thing about this horrible diagnosis, is that it really strengthens community. And these moms come together to support each other in ways that just humbles and inspires me every single day. I see it in my group and I hear it from the moms that I talk to, and I feel like all of my patients know each other, even though they've never actually met in person. But one of the challenges that we definitely face is because there's so few of us that are truly have solid expertise and comfort and know how to manage this really complex condition that is so complex that even if you look at one kid who has PANS or PANDAS, you're looking at one kid, like they're not all going to respond the same way. They're not all going to have the same triggers. They're not going to have the same reactions. They're not going to respond the same way to different treatments and meds and all of that. That's why it has to be so individualized. People will travel all over the world to see doctors. I work with people all over the world. And so a lot of other doctors, even conventionally trained doctors, people will travel from all over to see them, and they work long distance and remotely and everything. And the challenge, though, is that when you have a true emergency, if it's getting to a point that, if I can give you a homeopathic remedy recommendation today, but you can't get that remedy because we don't have easy access to all of the remedies at like a local health food store, if it's going to take a couple of days for it to get to you through me or through ordering from a homeopathic pharmacy, you may have to go to the emergency room beforehand. And I always try to have people do the best they can to find a local doctor who's at least familiar with PANS and PANDAS, who has emergency room privileges, so that they can intervene. I do not have that capacity to intervene for my patients in every aspect that I want to be able to. I'm hoping to do the work that I can to change that. And I've got a lot of the parents of my patients who have gotten to that point of recovery that now have the capacity to help other people because they're no longer in crisis management mode for their child, that we're working on getting PANS and PANDAS centers in these hospitals so that it can be recognized. But there's so much room for growth and so much need to grow, because there's entire communities that people will have nobody to go to that is even remotely familiar with PANS or PANDAS, or worse, is familiar enough and thinks that it's a bogus diagnosis, and then they treat mom like she's crazy and then, yes, medically kidnap your child. And I wish that was the first time I'd heard that, and it's unfortunately not. It's so heartbreaking.
So let's get into what you think what's the perfect storm or the soup that has made it so that children now versus 40 years ago, like grandparents who are listening are going, we all got strep and none of us got this, what's going on? Whereas now it's becoming really common that those with will develop PANS or PANDAS and then get misdiagnosed as possibly a mental health issue, or like being on the spectrum, or something else. if the doctor doesn't know what PANS or PANDAS is. So so it's more and more common, but not enough
Yeah.
doctors know to diagnose it correctly. Why is it now so much? So why is it now so common? What is happening in the physiology of our children now, in the environment that they're in, and the food that they're eating, and the air that they're breathing, the water they're drinking, that is making their bodies susceptible to this?
So it's super, super complicated, and I'm going to get a little bit wonky here. And if I trail off in a way that gets confusing, bring me back, please.
Okay.
Okay. It's so many different things that are contributing to it. I think that part of it is that we have been waging war rather than practicing diplomacy in medicine. I had this existential crisis moment at a conference recently where all of these integrative doctors and functional medicine doctors are focusing on all of the ways that we need to combat mold, and we need to combat this bacteria, we need to manipulate this part of the microbiome and this part of the microbiome, and all of these different things where we're going in with bombs trying to control so much of our environment rather than working with it. And that's one thing I love about homeopathy. I finally came to this place. My existential crisis moment was where I was feeling like I was a general in an unjust war, and that basically we end up creating this maybe a horrible metaphor, but I'm going to go with it because it works for me. If it doesn't work for you, I'll try something different. But it's like this metaphor where, as somebody who supported the global war on terror and the Operation Iraqi Freedom, I feel like we're doing Operation Iraqi Freedom again, and that we are going in and trying to bomb the heck out of something that is a bad guy. And in that work of trying to bomb the bad guy, trying to get Al Qaeda out and trying to get Saddam Hussein out, and all of the things that happen, regardless of what you feel about the start of those wars led to ISIS, and ISIS is worse than Al Qaeda. And so I think about how we are doing that in our bodies. Like, we're going after these bugs and these things and trying to control and manipulate, and then we leave this vacuum, and other things come in that are opportunistic, and they're worse for us. And so we've been just exponentially increasing that war. Does my analogy sort of make sense to you?
Yes.
Okay.
But what about the average person who hasn't been waging a war on
But we've all
mold?
been doing it. We've been doing it without realizing it. So we've been doing it by giving an antibiotic for every sniffle that we have. We've been doing it by giving antibiotics to our food livestock. We've been doing it by using antibacterial soaps. We've been doing it by getting super hygiene focused. So we've been waging all these wars with indirectly. Even if I'm not taking a ton of antibiotics in my mouth, people around me have been. And I've been going to the restroom in public restrooms with antibacterial soap and using that. And my mom definitely gave me antibiotics when I probably didn't need it, because I wasn't doing well, and it's hard to wait out a virus, and pediatricians succumb to parental pressure frequently, and they give something because you don't want to go to the doctor and say, okay, I'm paying all this money to be told to do nothing, right? So there's that. We're also waging a war on our environment by creating better living through chemistry. So we are increasing the toxicity of mold by our chemicals that we use on paints, on things that we're protecting wood with. Mold only creates toxins in response to man-made chemicals. And so it is fighting against us because we're fighting against it. So we're just in this back and forth war. So whether we're taking the pills are happening. The changes in our environment are happening. The toxins are changing. Our food is changing. That's another contributing factor. So we have less nutritious food because of policies from the big government, and where farmers are getting subsidies for which things that they're producing. It's growing the use of things like glyphosate and other pesticides that impact our nervous system. So if we're eating fresh fruits and vegetables, but we're eating conventionally grown fresh fruits and vegetables, those are causing inflammation to our nervous system, impacts on our immune system, impacts on our endocrine system. So all of it is affected by the chemicals that we use, and the nutrients are being depleted in our soil because of farming practices and how they've changed. So we have lower nutrients, more toxins on the foods that we're eating that have less nutrition in the first place. And we're processing things a lot. When I was growing up, my mom made an awful lot of things from scratch. Granted, I grew up as the child of farmers. I didn't grow up on a farm, but my parents were farmers, and they had grown up on farms. So maybe that's a component of it. Maybe this happened even before for some people, but there was a lot more processed foods. Lunchables was not a thing. And like, it was a brand new thing when I was in like middle school or high school. It was not something that we got regularly. We didn't get a lot of processed foods. It was a treat to get sugary cereal because we almost never got those kinds of things, right? So we're processing things that removes the nutrients. And here's a big one that I'm sure a lot of your listeners and you have heard about is the genetic polymorphism, the SNP, for MTHFR. It's rampant in the population. Shouldn't be that big of a problem, right? That means we've been having people passing down MTHFR variants for years. The difference is that we haven't always been eating in foods that are enriched with folic acid, and folic acid clogs up malfunctioning MTHFR genes, or the enzymes that they code for, to be more precise. And so we're eating less nutritious food that has toxins covered all over it in environments where we've got antibiotics in all of the foods that we're eating and hormones used to manipulate the food livestock that we're consuming. And we're heating up our processed foods in plastic, and we're going to sleep in houses that are filled with chemicals that are themselves toxic, but then also create toxic mold exposure when they get wet and have leaks and all of that. So it's so many things. It's genetics, it's the environment, it's the microbiome and the impacts that we've had on the microbiome. It's how we're eating, because most of the parents that I work with, they were eating a pretty standard diet, like a standard American diet, which has a lot of processed food before their kid got sick because of convenience. We overwork ourselves, which means we don't have time to tend to ourselves anymore. I can be super guilty of this too. I have to have these conversations with myself all the time. No, it's time to get up, and it's when you get up, you need to do your meditation and your yoga, and you need to eat a healthy breakfast, and it needs to be all these different things, because if I just take the easy thing, I'm not going to be able to take care of my patients, because I'm not taking care of myself. But our diet impacts our microbiome with one meal. One meal is all it takes to change the makeup of our microbiome. And so when we're constantly eating these things that feed the bad guys and starve the good guys, we're already creating an imbalance. And then when we throw in antibiotics for colds that don't react to antibiotics, and we throw in the inflammatory response that we're having to all of these chemicals in our environment, it's surprising that we don't all have this kind of thing. I mean, we're seeing autoimmunity show up rampantly in the society, at least in American society, whether it's PANS or PANDAS. This is just one particular form of it. We're seeing a lot more autoimmunity, a lot more thyroid condition and thyroid dysfunction as a result of autoimmunity. It's a lot of gut autoimmunity coming up a lot more frequently too. It's really a problem.
Absolutely. I think you painted that picture perfectly. I didn't have to rope you in. You didn't go on any crazy tangents. That was really well done. I've had other experts on the show talk about different things that you've brought up. Dr. Ben Lynch, he was episode 225, talks about dirty genes, his book, Dirty Genes. Really good episode if those of you who want to learn more about MTHFR, or supporting the body in the face of those SNPs. But it's very interesting about how, because our food supply has been contaminated by man-made contaminated, we're intentionally putting folic acid into the food to help prevent one disease, and then it ends up harming so many people who cannot metabolize that need methylated B vitamins.
So all of these moms who have been taking, not only eating foods that have folic acid in it, they've been taking a well-intentioned recommendation for a prenatal that has folic acid, when that might actually be making things worse for their kiddo. Mm-hmm. So it's again, it's medicine has to catch up to the research. The clinical practice of medicine has to catch up to the research, and it takes so many years for it to catch up. And so I think that that's part of it too, is that we're playing catch up from good intentions.
So I definitely want to get into the questions that we have in the Facebook group, and how to help someone who help the parents and help the children who have PANS and PANDAS. But first, I want to cover for everyone, for 100% of the population, how can we prevent PANDAS and PANS? It sounds like one of the ways we can prevent it is by, like you've mentioned, being diligent with our diet, eating clean food, going that extra mile to make sure the food is clean, to make sure our water is clean, to make sure that we're not waging a war against things, but we understand that there needs to be that balance. So looking to support the environment of the body. What other ways can we help to prevent PANS and PANDAS in the first place?
So I'm going to be a bit of a wah-wah, like bummer here. I don't know yet, and I don't know that you can. That's one of the reasons that homeopathy becomes so vital, is because really ultimately it's not just about all of these things. And if you have this perfect environment and like perfect diet and you as a mother, like your whole family never took any antibiotics and like you only ate food that you raised on your organic farm and all of those things. I've got patients like that who still have PANS and PANDAS. So it's not necessarily something you can control, which is where homeopathy, I think, becomes this vital like linchpin for these kids, is because homeopathy doesn't require us knowing exactly what happened in the body or exactly what the underlying cause or trying to manipulate biochemistry or neurotransmitters. What homeopathy does is it treats susceptibility, and that's really what it comes down to. We have to focus on this again and again. A lot of parents, when they get the diagnosis of PANS or PANDAS, they get so focused on that bug, and we're just perpetuating that battle of approach to health instead of the diplomacy approach to health. I always say that homeopathy is more diplomacy because it's nudging the body in the direction to heal itself, to repair its immune function, to repair its immune response, to restore balance to its hormones and neurotransmitters, which we see. We see lab values change with homeopathic medicine when it's done well. It just takes time. But homeopathy is really treating that susceptibility, because you see it all the time. You see parents where their entire life was leading up to prevention of anything, right? Of perfect health, perfect, exactly what you would recommend as a prevention, and their kiddo still gets it. And you'll see that one kid in the family gets it and another doesn't. And so it's that one child that for whatever reason has that susceptibility. And we can't always identify it's this SNP, it's this gene, it's this bug, it's this whatever. It's their unique susceptibility, and homeopathy treats that. We also see it happen where I've got kids that I treat who are adopted, and all of the kids in the family have it despite the fact that they're adopted. So it's not just genes and it's not just environment, it's both. And it's a big question mark for what that last little piece is. And we just, as of right now, define it as susceptibility, and that's where homeopathy comes in. So I wish I could give your listeners some better hope that if you do this exactly right, that they're going to avoid PANS or PANDAS for their kiddo. And unfortunately, that's not likely to be the case.
However, we should still eat organic, eat clean,
Yes.
do the best we can to make sure our body is optimally healthy. 11 years ago, for those who've been listening to the show a long time know my story. 11 years ago, I was very, very sick. I could barely function. I was constantly on antibiotics. I had type 2 diabetes, chronic adrenal fatigue, chronic infections, polycystic ovarian syndrome, infertility. I had brain fog so bad that I couldn't process human language in the morning. It took to be about 11 a.m. before I could understand what people were saying. I mean, I was really, really sick. And we saw this health documentary, because this is back in 2008. They were just on Netflix, just starting to have health documentaries on. And the first one we watched streaming, it was like the first movie I ever saw streaming. There was the original CEO, the original, I guess, creator of Whole Foods, talking about, health and their mission. He said, vote with your fork. And I understood. Yes. And they also talked about shopping the perimeter, right? So I was like, okay, we're doing it. We're going to Whole Foods. We lived in Las Vegas at the time. It's like very difficult to get clean food there. Mm-hmm. So we went to Whole Foods and we shopped the perimeter, which was hard because, we would be reading the standard American diet at that point. But we shopped the perimeter, which means you don't go into the aisles where the processed food is. So you're eating meat and vegetables and dairy and fruit, and that's it, right? So we did that, and we chose 100% organic. And in 1 month, I woke up and I realized that that was the first month that I didn't need to be on antibiotics.
Yeah.
That was the first month since I could remember that I wasn't sick, that I wasn't getting an infection so bad that I couldn't function. Like, I was like, oh my
Mhm.
gosh, in less than a month of just eating organic, my immune system recovered.
Well, it probably wasn't just organic. It was organic and more nutrient dense,
Sure.
and it was less inflammatory. So it was multiple things. So absolutely. I didn't mean to say that we should just keep eating and just like deal with it when it comes, just like eat your McDonald's and deal with it because you're going to get pans or pandas anyway. Absolutely not. I think that ultimately, my husband worked in conservation before he left to help me run my practice so I could really just focus on being a doctor and like being the best doctor I could and not all the administrative things. He worked in conservation, and so we're both really passionate about the environment as well. It's part of how we fell in love was in the mountains. And
Nice.
so we're really, really focused on the environment, which is part of why I had this existential crisis. Like, are we doing things that are destroying the environment and our health at the same time, and by our unintentional or convenience focused mindset? And so I would say that absolutely, we all really need to focus on having not just a health conscious diet, but an environmentally conscious diet, because the environment and the impacts of the environment have made a big difference for people with autoimmunity, and especially these kids. It's about how we have to process trash. So, are you buying things that are gluten-free, dairy-free, vegan, whole foods in a box? Well, that's not what you should be doing. Like, that's still a processed food that still creates trash. It still put a lot of energy into making it, and it's still going to have impacts on your body that your body wasn't meant to recognize. We're not supposed to eat these processed foods. So absolutely, we should be doing our best effort to eat organic foods. And yes, you vote with your fork, because yes, there is some issue. People will always bring up, well, you have cross contamination and all of these different things. Well, the more people who are demanding organic produce, the more people are going to grow it, and the better practices that they're going to have with the soil management and the nutrition value of the foods, and the less that we're going to have exposure to these toxic chemicals that are creating so much inflammation and hyperpermeability of our gut, otherwise known as leaky gut, and all of these things that are contributing to all of these chronic illnesses. So yeah, definitely just think about the environment, because what's good for the environment is good for your health. I'm a firm believer that in order to be a truly holistic and integrative doctor, you have to think about the environment as well as your health.
Absolutely. And I'm highly allergic to dairy, and I was still eating dairy back then. So
Yep.
it's like, and then when I took dairy out, that was like another life-changing event. Then when I took gluten out, that was like another life-changing event. So for me, every time I take out something I'm allergic to and then add in more whole foods, it's like life-changing. So I'm still learning, right? We're all still learning. I'm still learning, and I love learning from experts like you, because you're reaffirming what my body keeps telling me, right? And what we keep learning every time that we eat healthy is that our body can heal really quickly, or it can go downhill really quickly depending on our diet.
And the question about what is healthy, or what the best diet is, that people always ask these things. And this is one reason that one of the moms that I've worked with for several years, who has seen her child recover from PANDAS, that we are working together to put some programs together to help moms learn how to do this. Because what one person thinks is healthy, I'll have people come to me all the time and say, oh, I eat a pretty healthy diet. When they tell me what they're eating, I'm like, do you realize you're giving so much sugar? Yes, it might be a better form of sugar. It's not white processed sugar, but you're still feeding the bugs that are not helping your kiddo feel better. And so we're working on helping moms learn how to navigate this. And one reason I'm partnering with one of the moms that I work with is because there's only so much that a doctor can tell you when the rubber hits the road, and you got to get your kiddo to eat these things or to change the way that they're living and to change their diet. It can be really hard. And so having both doctor and mom together can be really helpful to get the good information and then how to actually make it happen.
Absolutely. And I highly recommend that listeners go to your Facebook group, Homeopathy for PANS and PANDAS. Search that in Facebook, or go to the show notes of today's podcast, because a link will be there as well at learntourhealth.com. Because Dr. Bahr is going to be coming out with you're writing a book, is that correct?
Yeah, so we're starting with a book first and foremost, but the intention is to start with a book that's basically a guide for moms on how to navigate PANS and PANDAS, how to identify it, and how to navigate all of the different things that go into treatment, from the conventional approach to the natural and functional approach to homeopathy. And like I said, it's a mom's story, a doctor's tips, and then a mom's advice on how to actually make it happen. And then the plan is to offer a program as well to help moms who need a little bit more support in implementing the things that we talk about in the book.
Got it. But listeners at this point who know that their kids need some extra support from a doctor, you do take individual clients through Skype, is that correct?
Yeah, through long distance through another program. But yeah, we do work with people virtually.
Got it. Maybe not Skype because you need it to be secure for medical reasons. I understand. Let's get into these questions. I'm so eager to hear your answers. So Ileana says, are there natural alternatives to the prophylactic antibiotics, antivirals, and to supporting the immune system during bacterial, fungal, or viral flares? What about absent seizures, motor tics?
That's a hefty question. So there are natural herbs and things like that you can use that work in a similar way to antibiotics. I have mixed feelings about using them just because there's not as much evidence behind them. I will use them, especially if somebody is really sensitive, but you can still have sensitivities to herbs that have similar actions in the body as an antibiotic. You can also develop a resistance to the herbs. There was a research presentation shared at our annual conference last year that was really fantastic, that was also scary, that showed that you can actually develop antibiotic resistance to antimicrobial herbs, just like you can to the antibiotics themselves. And it happened pretty quickly in the tests that they did. So there are things that you can use. It's going to be up to the individual. This is probably going to get a little bit frustrating, but like I said earlier, a lot of these kids, if you've seen one kid with PANS or PANDAS, you've seen one kid with PANS and PANDAS, because they have similarities, but they're still so individualized, and what works for one person isn't going to work for another. There are some supplements that can be used to help mitigate yeast. Caprylic acid is one that's used pretty frequently. Saccharomyces boulardii, it's a yeast-hating yeast, so people will give that oftentimes if they're using the prophylactic antibiotics. Other herbs, like I said, there's not as much evidence behind them. So I'm always hesitant to use them because I have homeopathy as one of my tools. And when we're using homeopathy and when we're using other natural therapies, in my approach that I take, we're working to try and get people off of needing to take these things long term, because we want the immune system fighting it the way that it's supposed to, and not having to take all of these supplements and tons and tons of pills, whether they're natural or conventional, to just fight off the infection. We want the infection to be handled and managed by the body the way that it's meant to. There's another part of that question. I don't remember the other part.
What about absent seizures and motor tics?
So again, those are things that are the susceptibility, where homeopathy is going to be the most important component. The medications, the conventional medications that are used to control seizures, do not have like a one-for-one replacement. Most things in the psychiatric realm don't have a one-for-one replacement. And even when they do, the rare occasion when they do, for instance, St. John's wort can basically be a replacement for an SSRI. It has the same action in the body. The challenge that you face is that they're not standardized. And so if you're getting something from whether it's even from your naturopathic doctor or your functional medicine doctor, or you're buying something over the counter from Whole Foods or another health food store, one company's version is going to be different, and you need to make sure you're getting the right part of the plant. So I never recommend that people try to do one-for-one replacement, because they're probably not getting it exactly the way that they are hoping to get it. But when it comes to like the anti-seizure medications, there isn't something that's just a clear like natural replacement. People will do things like using the ketogenic diet, which I have mixed feelings about, because it has a lot of impacts on the microbiome as well, and it's very hyper restrictive. And I think that we sometimes are looking for a solution right now and don't think about the long-term implications. And I think the ketogenic diet can be that for some people. It is really clinically useful for severe intractable seizures, but not specifically absence seizures.
Mm-hmm.
The good news is that, again, homeopathy, when you use a individually prescribed remedy based off of your child's overall presentation as a whole person, you're going to be treating absence seizures and tics as well.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. If a parent has a child with PANS or PANDAS and they're doing everything they can to just keep them super healthy, and they're not on any medications right now, but then they're worried that the child is having a bacterial or viral or fungal infection, the best thing to do is to talk to their naturopathic pediatrician, to talk to you, to see what they can do. I mean, are there times in which you would say, okay, we need a medication?
Yes.
Okay.
And I will say that, like, just because of, the issue that we talked about earlier in the very beginning of our conversation about strep, I actually will tell parents to get their kids on antibiotics because for many, many, many reasons that include the cost and insurance coverage and all of these various different things, and even just willingness to take medications. The herbs that we need to use do not taste good. So a lot of kids won't take them. So you have to take into consideration not only like a strict philosophy, you need to look at what's the best tool and which thing can you do. So I'm also not a big fan of doing tons and tons of tests if there's not something that you can actually act on after the test. I test for things when I need to test for them, and I will test for infections if they haven't already been clearly identified, if I'm going to start an antibiotic, to make sure we're starting the right one. But yeah, I'm more likely to recommend antibiotics at this point than herbs, because I know that with the tool of homeopathy, I'm not going to need them forever.
Great. And that is, of course, if they have a bacterial infection, not if they have a fungal or viral infection.
Exactly.
Right. Danielle asks, how to know when we can stop antibiotics. My daughter has been on them since September. I'm currently weaning her off to see how she responds. I had asked her for a bit more information to clarify, and she says that her daughter has PANDAS from strep and her normal symptoms are gone right now thanks to long-term antibiotics, gluten-free, dairy-free diet, and supplements. She's wondering if she takes away the antibiotics, will all the symptoms return? How will removing antibiotics affect her inflammation, brain, and behavior when she takes her off of the antibiotics?
So it depends on what the antibiotic is. There are a lot of kids who work really well or who do really well on Augmentin, which is a combination of amoxicillin and clavulanic acid. And one of the theories for why the Augmentin works better than plain amoxicillin is because the clavulanic acid has some anti-inflammatory components to it, or anti-inflammatory effects. And so there's a lot of theories that the long-term use of the antibiotics is more for the anti-inflammatory component. So most people, if they're doing well, they can come off of antibiotics and they may do fine for a while. And unfortunately, there's not like a clear cut. If this happens, then your kid is ready to come off of and is going to do fine and not have any return of symptoms. It may be that your child does fine for a while until another big exposure comes that they're susceptible to, and then they get sick again. I do still think that it's a good idea to get people off of long-term antibiotics and the prophylactic antibiotics if they can, because of the impacts that it's having on the gut by taking this long-term antibiotic. So the thing is, when we try to work with getting these kids off, especially if you're not using a type of medicine like a homeopathic approach, then we don't know for sure how well your child has been healing in the process. Usually when I'm working with patients, I have people gradually wean off when they're doing well, and we then can manipulate and change the homeopathic remedy to help the body restore balance when we start to see symptoms return. And some kids will have issues come up just randomly, like loose teeth. Loose teeth actually can
Mm.
cause a really big problem for these kids because it disrupts biofilms. So there's a lot of things that could come into play that may or may not be related to just stopping the antibiotic. It may just be a new exposure. And if they're getting worse, it's because you, again, haven't treated that susceptibility. You're just going in trying to kill the bug rather than treating the fact that why did your child get this as a response to the bug in the first place? Because, that's a really big component that really seems to turn the light on for a lot of moms that I've worked with and a lot of moms in the group that we host. It's really that susceptibility piece that I talked about earlier, because like I said, one kid in the family can get PANS or PANDAS and the others don't. And I had mycoplasma pneumonia in November. Why did I get pneumonia and not get OCD? Because I don't have that susceptibility to mycoplasma causing that for me. Whereas a lot of my patients would get the mycoplasma, they'd have no signs of pneumonia. They would just have intractable OCD and terrible tics. So we still have to focus on that susceptibility, not just the antibiotics. So I'm afraid that if you haven't been doing anything other than the antibiotics, that you're likely to have a resurgence at some point. And so it's really important to get other therapies in that can help the body to heal and recover, and then treat that susceptibility with homeopathy.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like she's doing some diet and some supplement components. If a child is benefiting from the anti-inflammatory effects of a medication, of the antibiotics, I've had that experience. I was misdiagnosed once and given an antibiotic, and then all of a sudden within like an hour I got better, or 2 hours. It was just crazy. And I said, this is amazing. I feel amazing. I can't believe how fast that worked. And they're like, oh, okay, and then they figured out it wasn't an infection at all. It was just a lot of inflammation. And then the anti-inflammatory effects of the antibiotic is what I benefited from. I didn't have an infection. It was just raging inflammation. So for a child who's benefiting from 6 months or more of taking an antibiotic, you're saying that likely it's the anti-inflammatory effects. If it is the antibiotic that's anti-inflammatory, would you then have them take like quercetin and some other supplements to help decrease inflammation, and look at diet to make sure there's nothing pro-inflammatory, and sort of support the body as a whole to be very anti-inflammatory, and then take them off of the antibiotic and see how they do?
Yes. Yep, exactly. So if there's already supplements, there are undoubtedly going to be some anti-inflammatory supplements. I don't know a single PANS or PANDAS kiddo who's come to see me on supplements that doesn't have at least 3 or 4 anti-inflammatories. And different kids are going to respond to different supplements individually. So some kids do really well with something like turmeric or fish oil. Some don't do so well. Again, that's going to depend on their own, neurotransmitter makeup, their own genetic makeup, whether they have histamine reactivity, how their body clears histamine, how their body clears other neurotransmitters. So I'm always hesitant to give specific supplement advice because it's so individualized.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. And again, anyone who's listening, this is information. We are not treating or diagnosing anything. Please, take this information and see your doctor. See a naturopathic pediatrician. Go see Dr. Jennifer Bahr. Absolutely. Take this information and get a professional's advice with it. What about NAC as an anti-inflammatory? Is that one that you've seen these mothers give their children?
I've seen a lot of kids on it. I recently had a patient who got worse on NAC. And so supplements are just like medications, that we can have adverse reactions to them. And I hate to keep going back to like the genetics, but as much as we know about genetics, and Dr. Ben Lynch is fantastic. I learn a lot from him. And there's still only so much that we know. And when we try to force one pathway, we can back up other pathways. We can overcrowd things. I'm one of those people who has MTHFR and COMT and MAO SNPs and all these things. So if I overdo it on one way, I'm going to feel terrible on the other end. So it's really about finding the individual balance. And again, I keep coming back to homeopathy, but homeopathy works on the epigenetic level. So it helps us make the best of what we have, so that we're not having to manipulate things. But back to the question about NAC. So it's a precursor for glutathione, which is our major antioxidant in the body, and it's really important component for detoxification, which obviously, with all of the things that we talked about with that soup earlier, detoxification is definitely important for any human being living today, especially important for these kids who are just so inflamed, their bodies are on fire, basically. So it's definitely an important component, but how our body can make or transition the NAC to the glutathione is going to be different. And honestly, there's a lot of studies that are really helpful. The NAC can be really helpful for OCD and tics, and I've tried it a handful of times with patients and not seen the magic that I'm looking for. And I'm envious of these other integrative doctors who are reporting magic from some of these supplements that I just don't see. And maybe it's because I have the magic of homeopathy that really can transform people's lives very quickly in very dramatic ways that I expect too much from supplements. So it's a
like it.
problem.
I like it's a good problem to have. I like it.
Yeah. But so it can be useful. Yeah.
Lisa brings up an interesting point. She says, I often wonder if it's really strep that triggers these kids, or if it's after they were given antibiotics for strep and now they have yeast overgrowth in the gut.
Yeast can play a role, but I don't think it's the yeast. And I don't think it's the strep either. That's where we come back to that susceptibility, because your child, if they are having this reaction to strep, it's their susceptibility to it, because most people can get exposed to strep and not have an autoimmune response to it, and or don't have this specific autoimmune response. Yeast doesn't help things, definitely, because yeast impacts how our neurotransmitters are produced, because a lot of our neurotransmitters are actually made by our microbiome. Nutrients are made by our microbiome. So it definitely manipulates things in a way that doesn't help, but I don't think that yeast causes it. And I don't think it's because of antibiotics. I do think that the antibiotics, the frequent use of antibiotics can contribute to dysbiosis that works against us, but I don't think the yeast causes it.
Interesting. I've had a few doctors on the show sharing some really interesting insights, and through their research, one doctor who's actually not a physician, she's a researcher. You've probably heard of Dr. Stephanie Seneff. I've had her on the show twice. She links glyphosate in our food and in the MMR vaccine with the increased rates of disease and neurological issues like more children on the spectrum. Glyphosate being a chelator that is putting heavy metals into our kidneys and crossing the blood-brain barrier, putting heavy metals into our nervous system. And then I recently had a naturopathic pediatrician on the show say that her belief is that vaccines are not the sole cause of autism, but she believes that it is the use of Tylenol after a child receives vaccines that is the major contributor. Of course, environment to the body, everything, right? Everything can kind of be that perfect storm, or that soup, like you say. And the environment of the body is very important. But she believes that what tips children over is the use of Tylenol, that because it also crosses the blood-brain barrier, it impacts how the liver detoxes and produces glutathione. So you're ramping a child's immune system up with a vaccine, and then dampening it with Tylenol, which is really confusing the body. So we have sort of these different theories, but it's all very modern day things we're doing to the body that we didn't have around 200 years ago. So we're seeing, like you've mentioned several things, we're seeing our genetics have not caught up to this modern world where we're constantly bombarding our bodies with chemicals that are unseen, that we don't think about. But we're only within a few generations of this, the environment that the body is in. And these are all new man-made diseases, basically, that are coming up as a result of our lifestyles. So we're kind of seeing that this is taking place, that PANS and PANDAS is now so prevalent because it is a man-made disease. It is triggered by, like you said, what's happening in our environment, in the body's environment. Lisa also goes on to ask, she says, we never went the antibiotic route, but instead focused on healing the gut. My kids are only triggered from yeast overgrowth in the gut and their labs show mold toxicity. I want to know if my children will ever outgrow PANS. What is actually happening to the brain when their yeast is high? How can something like yeast trigger OCD and tics and changes in her children's personality completely? She's very thankful that we're doing this interview.
So, yes, your child can outgrow PANS and PANDAS. I see it happen all the time in my practice. I don't know if it's possible if you don't include homeopathy, because again, we have to treat that susceptibility so that when your child, when you do the healing, when your child is exposed to something, because they will be, because they're human, we're not living in bubbles. When we try to put people in bubbles, we create other issues, right? So they will be exposed to things, and if we don't help repair that susceptibility, there is a chance that they'll have another flare or a resurgence or regression with the PANS or PANDAS. Mold is absolutely a big trigger. And if your child is more triggered by mold, absolutely yeast is going to play a role in that, because they're both fungus, right? So one of the challenges that we're dealing with when we have a yeast overgrowth is that we usually have some level of intestinal hyperpermeability or leaky gut. And there's a lot more evidence that shows that when we have leaky gut, we also have leaky brain. And that's one of the ways that we're getting things into our brain across that blood-brain barrier that aren't meant to be there, and how we end up having the brain fog and the changes in our mood that are contributed to the things that are going on in our gut. And this is in part because we end up getting things into our bloodstream that aren't meant to be there. You know, our gut is meant to be this really fantastic guardian for us, where things have, we have a very specific process to break things down. So we've got the tiniest little bit of particles that can get into our body, and they're broken down to points that they aren't recognizable as a foreign invader. When we are not doing well with our digestion and our gut is leaky, we get things that are bigger particles into our bloodstream that we then recognize as foreign invaders. And so that's how we get food allergies. We have things that look like they are bacteria trying to come and invade us. And so we treat them like it is. The immune system gets ramped up, and then we get inflammation, and then inflammation can lead to more permeability of capillaries and different tissues. And so it's a self-perpetuating cycle that keeps going. And so I think that we really obviously have to get the gut healed, and it sounds like she's focusing on that and getting the gut back into control. I would still recommend adding in homeopathy to treat that susceptibility, because like I said earlier, one meal can change the makeup of your microbiome. And we don't want to live in a world where we have to have such super, super strict control, because we want to also have that joy and that pleasure. You know, you want your kids, especially kids who have PANS and PANDAS that have been, prisoners in their homes in many cases. I mean, these kids won't go to school. They won't leave home. They're afraid to sleep. They're so scared. These kids are tortured. They are prisoners of their own mind, and they're prisoners in their homes because of this condition. That when they start to feel better, you want them to be able to go and eat some birthday cake every once in a while, right? And the way that you can allow that to happen is if we treat that susceptibility, and yes, make sure that we maintain as good a diet as we possibly can, so that we're not eating birthday cake 7 times a day or 7 times a week, but that we want our kids to be able to have that stress release, because stress also causes inflammation, right? And not being able to be part of a social community also contributes to inflammation and worsening of outcomes. So it's about balance, really.
That leads perfectly into Lisa's part 2 of her question. She goes, "Oh, please ask about low-dose naltrexone. My daughter doesn't need it, but we struggle more with my son. We have addressed diet for 4 years now. They are on a whole food, clean diet. If I restrict my son's diet anymore, he will grow up hating me. My daughter has no issues and loves her diet, but my son tells me all the time that when he sees his friends eat foods he can't have, he gets upset. I'm not willing to remove any more foods from him. So what are your thoughts on low-dose naltrexone for those with PANS and PANDAS?"
So I actually don't use it in my practice because I don't need to. With homeopathy as my main tool that I start everybody with, it's just never been something that I've seen be necessary. I know a lot of people do use it with great success. It can help with some immune system rebalancing. I'm not sure specifically about food allergies, so hopefully you have an LDN expert to come on, or already have one on that you can reference for people to talk to get a better answer about that one.
Do you know one that I could interview?
I can look and see who was there's somebody who gave a talk about it at our last conference. I can
I'd love
look
that.
up who that was.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. If you recommend them, I'd love that. And then Bonnie asks, and I love this question. She says, I know fever is the body's natural way of killing off foreign organisms. The world wants to reduce fever ASAP, but we know that we need to keep a fever for a time to, help the body kill the infection. How long and how high should it go? What temperature do we not want to go over? Like, if I had a pediatric naturopathic doctor say that 108 is when we should start worrying, whereas other doctors will say 104 is when we need to give the kids Tylenol. What is your take on fevers for children?
I always say 104. I stay with the standard at 104 just because there are some greater risks if we don't address things at 104. 104 is basically the cutoff when I tell people that they need to either get to the emergency room if they can't get the fever under control with an antipyretic.
Would you give herb that helps to break the fever cycle, or is that when you recommend an over-the-counter medication?
That's usually when I'll just have them go to an NSAID.
Okay. And is there homeopathy you would try first?
Yes, I would obviously get them in for an acute appointment so we could find the right remedy for that particular case. One remedy that most parents will use that can be indicated but is not always indicated is belladonna. It's really good when we're having high fevers, and especially if there are behavioral symptoms with the fevers. And it's generally really good in inflammation, but it's not the be all end all. So while it works for a lot of kids in a flare or with a fever, it's not always going to be the right remedy. And we talked about this. It's a good point for me to bring up right now. We had talked about it before that, yes, there's not really negative side effects to homeopathy, which makes it generally pretty safe. I will say that for kids who have PANS and PANDAS, they are so sensitive that they are more likely to have different reactions to homeopathy than what might be typically expected, including a really positive reaction that seems really negative, which is called an initial therapeutic aggravation. It's where symptoms get a little bit worse before they get better. Some people will call it a healing crisis. And some parents will see that as actually doing worse when it could be a really positive sign. And in some cases, there are some kids who actually can have a negative reaction to homeopathy because they're so darn sensitive. So it's not something that I recommend that people do on their own, based off of what they're hearing from people in groups, because it's not as easy to manage in a really, really sensitive kid who has PANS and PANDAS. But back to your original question, yes, I would work on it with a homeopathic remedy, and if we couldn't get it under control quickly enough, that's when we would be looking at managing the fever and getting it under control using an over-the-counter med.
Got it. Those with PANS or PANDAS, you really want to make sure that they're 104 or less. Is it because they're more sensitive or more susceptible?
Well, just because that's when we start to have more issues with potential damage to the brain
Yeah.
with fevers. And so ultimately, I'll be perfectly honest, most of the kids who have PANS and PANDAS don't get fevers until they're recovering. So when I start to see fevers with PANS and PANDAS, I am celebrating and doing cartwheels down the hallway in my office, because most of these kids are actually coming to me where mom says, they were so healthy, they never got sick, they had this perfect immune system, and they actually weren't developing the antibodies the way that they should, and they weren't having the appropriate immune response. So I can't tell you how many kids never got sick, and then suddenly kapow, this happens. And a lot of kids too, that there was never any sign of strep or never any sign of any illness. They just had the behavioral symptoms, and had they not stumbled on something about PANS and PANDAS, they never would have even thought to do a rapid strep test. So the kids who are always fine and never had fevers, oftentimes there's something else going on there. So honestly, when people start to get a fever, I am super happy, and I don't try to suppress it and at all until it gets at that 104.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, we use homeopathy to either, whether we're adjusting their chronic remedy, sometimes we just need to make an adjustment in the chronic remedy when one of those things comes up, or switch to a short-term acute remedy before we move on to a different potency or preparation of their chronic remedy to help them get through an acute illness.
Got it. And just to wrap up Bonnie's question, she wanted to know, how long can a child have a fever safely, would you say?
Oh, I don't remember what the guidelines are.
Okay. So, but if a child is having a fever, that's actually a good thing. It's a good thing. I get so excited when my son has a fever because I know his immune system is kicking in. So we can actually celebrate. and not get scared. I think parents get really scared when their child has a fever. What we need to do is get really happy. Of course, just monitor them, hydrate them, be in touch with our pediatrician, but be happy knowing the body is mounting a defense, is mounting a response.
Ultimately, when it comes to fevers and management of fevers, just stay in regular communication with your pediatrician, because a fever could be a really positive thing, or it could be a sign of something going in the wrong direction, depending on what's going on. So don't listen to me or anybody else who's giving a blanket response about a fever. Talk to your doctor so that you can make sure you're getting the right information for your kiddo. I'd hate to miss meningitis or something like that because you're waiting too long. And that's the thing, is like, even with strep, like we talked about earlier, it has to be treated early to prevent some of these things happening to the kidneys and the heart. Like, your test that you had when you were in undergrad. It's important that we get early intervention. So don't suppress a fever once you have ruled out other major life-threatening things that can cause a fever. Is that
Absolutely.
better?
Absolutely. Can you tell us, like, for those who don't know, because so it's so funny because I always want to take my son to the doctor. Like our pediatrician's a naturopath, so she spends like at least a half an hour with us. I feel like pampered. I love it. I love seeing naturopathic physicians, and so I want to take him all the time when he has issues, not when there's nothing going on. But my husband's like always looking at me like, really? Like he goes, my mom never took me to the doctor. I don't know why we have to, like kids just get sick and then they get better. Why are we going to the doctor? And it's just because I know that it's better to be safe than sorry. But for us who don't know the signs and symptoms of strep, can you sort of tell us what it is we're looking for? Like, we don't want to be the hyperactive parents who every sniffle we end up in the doctor's office. So, but we don't want to feel like idiots, right? Like taking our kid to the doctor's office for every sniffle, and the doctor's kind of giving us a look like, your kid's fine, go home. But we also don't want to underreact and miss strep. So what are the signs and symptoms of strep?
So it's a lot of, obviously the sore throat that doesn't go away. Fever can definitely be part of it, but not always. With the kids with PANS and PANDAS, they may have no signs. It may just be behavioral things that are sudden. So when we're looking at the behavioral components, if there's a sudden, seemingly overnight change in your child's behavior, if they were fine last night and they woke up today and they are telling them that their brain is being mean to them and saying the same things, and they can't stop thinking about something, or they have a random tic, go get them checked for strep. The strawberry tongue is a pretty pathognomonic component for strep. So that's where the tongue actually looks like a strawberry. So it's bright red and a little bit swollen. There can be spots on the throat too. So taking a look and seeing if the throat is really swollen, inflamed, irritated. And then that, like I said, that strawberry tongue, and then like some spots on the throat. So just take a look at your kid. Don't just ask them how they feel. Look inside their mouth and see if there's something unusual. So look inside your kid's mouth right now when you're listening to this and see what it looks like normally, so that you've got something to compare it to. And then you don't necessarily need to rush off to the doctor for like low grade fevers, anything less than 101.4 or 100.4. I definitely don't worry about at all. So if it's less than 100.4, it doesn't even actually count as a fever. So anything between like 100.4 and 104, that's when I'm starting to monitor things, but you don't necessarily need to rush off. If there's really intense headaches, definitely go see the doctor. If there's difficulty like bending your neck, go see the doctor. And if the throat looks odd and it's inflamed and got spots, and you got the strawberry tongue, or if you have a rash, a sandpaper-like rash, go see the doctor, because those can be signs that it's strep.
Thank
and again,
you.
that's sudden behavior change too.
Awesome. And then if a child does have strep, the best route to do antibiotics, in your opinion?
Yes. If you have active strep, I always tell my patients to do antibiotics, even if we're still using homeopathy. Homeopathy helps to stimulate the body to heal. It can be helpful in active strep infections, but one of the challenges is that there's over 3,000 homeopathic remedies to select from, and you have to get the right fit. And you may not get the right fit on the first try. Even somebody who's really pretty good at what they do, I'm pretty darn good at what I do. About 80% of my patients get better, but they don't all get better on the first remedy that I give them. About 20% don't have a response to that first remedy. And so I have to try again, and we can't we can't always know that the reaction is going to happen fast enough either. So some kids, it's within a few hours. Some people have a response like you did within 10 minutes. You felt significantly better. Some people, it takes a couple of days to a couple of weeks, even depending on the how chronic what's going on is, and just the nature of the child. So relying exclusively on homeopathy when you're just getting started isn't wise. When it comes to somebody who I've been working with for a while and I know how they respond to antibiotics and I know how they respond to homeopathy, we'll make an individual decision for that child. But when I'm first getting started with somebody, if they're not rocking it on homeopathic medicine and having significantly better immune responses, then yeah, I want them on antibiotics.
This has been such a wealth of information. Thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing all this. To wrap up the interview, is there a message or is there something that you'd like to say to those who suspect that their children have PANS or PANDAS, or those that know that they do? Is there sort of information you just love to make sure parents know?
The thing that seems to connect for the most parents is that concept of susceptibility. We focus so much on what pills can I take to give them, or what pills can I give my kid? What diet do I need to take to battle this infection, or to put the fire out of the inflammation? And yes, those things are important. That it does play a role in long-term success and health for all of us to focus on not having an inflammatory diet and appropriately fighting infections when we need to, but we can't focus just on those infections. It's that susceptibility. It's why your kiddo gets strep and your kiddo's best friend, that your kiddo gets strep and gets the OCD and ticks, and your kiddo's best friend who gave them strep just gets strep throat and is back to school in 4 days after after a course of antibiotics, and your kid won't go to school anymore. So the susceptibility is really where you have to have that focus to have the long-term healing that you want. And the long-term healing is possible. I have kids who, after working with homeopathy, and it does take time, but with working with homeopathy, that they can get strep and have the typical signs of strep and not the atypical signs. They don't have behavioral flares. And I've actually had a lot of kids that they're just doing so well with their chronic homeopathic remedy and their healing that they can be exposed to strep, like their sibling can get strep throat and they don't even get sick. And so healing is possible when you focus on susceptibility and you treat the susceptibility using homeopathy, and yes, doing all the other things to make sure that you're not just bailing out a boat that's capsizing using a colander. So like getting more water coming out as water's coming in. So yes, you have to focus on the diet and lifestyle, but susceptibility is the thing that really is the key. And when I talk to parents about that, it seems to really finally click why they're on this merry-go-round. I can't tell you how many PANS and PANDAS parents have so many different rounds of antibiotics that their kids have gone through, and 7 in 1 year, 10 or 14 in another year, and they come in on buckets full of supplements, like 38 pills, 38 different supplements, I think is my max I've seen so far. And they have to see so many different doctors because you're chasing the symptoms and not addressing the susceptibility. So focusing in on that susceptibility can help get off of that roller coaster of emotions and moods and off the merry-go-round of meds and supplements.
And how can they learn more about how to focus on the susceptibility? Is that by working with you, going to your Facebook group? We have a lot of free resources in your Facebook group.
Yes. So I would recommend that people first and foremost go to the Facebook group. I have a free mini course that I put together explaining all about homeopathy and PANS and PANDAS, so that people can really start to learn how this new type of medicine that's unfamiliar to them, and get a really strong grasp of that. And then it's a really great community. Moms offer an awful lot of support. I interact with people to give them some guidance and direct them in the right direction. I obviously can't give any medical advice to somebody who's not a patient, and definitely not in the format of a Facebook group. But that's a place to really start to learn and get some good resources. Yes, I'm a good resource for people who are looking for some help. And I'm also really busy, as most PANS and PANDAS doctors are. So I am in the process of getting some more doctors here and also doing some training for other doctors. I speak at conferences, but I'm putting together a training program for doctors as well that's coming second to the programs to help moms. So it's going to be a little bit of time. because first and foremost, I need to help the patients get some help right now. But getting into that group will help you get to learn some resources so that we can get the help that you need, so you can understand it, so you can make good decisions, whether you're seeing me or somebody who's working with me or somebody else completely who just happens to be available sooner. So you can make educated decisions about who to see, when to see them, how to consult with them, et cetera, and really understand what it is that you're doing to get the most out of this really powerful medicine.
I love it. Now, your website is resiliencenaturopathic.com. Of course, the links to everything that Dr. Jennifer Bahr does is going to be in the show notes of today's podcast at learnyourhealth.com, including the link to your Facebook group. You take on clients and patients around the world, and you have your Facebook group. Is there anything else that we need to know about, that we should know about your services or working with you?
I would say that if you are interested in learning about the book and the programs, when the mother that I'm working with and I have them completed, to sign up for our email list, we'll definitely let people know there first. And also in the Facebook group, we'll let people know that it's available. So that's another thing, a resource that is coming that's not available yet, but you can be first notified if you sign up for our email list in the group.
Awesome. Well, absolutely. You're welcome back on the show when your book is coming out. I'd love to help you promote it during its launch, and just have you back and have you teach us some more great things and also help promote your book. That would be fantastic to have you back.
Awesome. I would really love to come back.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, and I can't wait to talk to you again soon.
Sounds good.
Hello, true health seeker. Have you ever thought about becoming a health coach? Do you love learning about nutrition and how we can shift our lifestyle and our diet so that we can gain optimal health and happiness and longevity? Do you love helping your friends and family to solve their health problems and to figure out what they can do to eat healthier? Are you interested in becoming someone who can grow their own business, support people in their success? Do you love helping people? You might be the perfect candidate to become a health coach. I highly recommend checking out the Institute for Integrative Nutrition. I just spent the last year in their health coaching certification program, and it really blew me away. It was so amazing. I learned over 100 dietary theories. I learned all about nutrition, but from a standpoint of how we can help people to shift their life and shift their lifestyle to gain true holistic health. I definitely recommend you check them out. You can Google Institute for Integrative Nutrition or IIN and give them a call, or you can go to learntruehealth.com/coach and you can receive a free module of their training to check it out and see if it's something that you'd be interested in. Be sure to mention my name, Ashley James, and the Learn True Health podcast, because I made a deal with them that they will give you the best price possible. I highly recommend checking it out. It really changed my life to be in their program, and I'm such a big advocate that I wanted to spread this information. We need more health coaches. In fact, health coaching is the largest growing career right now in the health field. So many health coaches are getting in and helping people because you can work in chiropractic offices, doctors' offices, you can work in hospitals, you can work online through Skype and help people around the world. You can become an author, you can go into the school system and help your local schools shift their programs to help children be healthier. You can go into senior centers and help them to shift their diet and lifestyle to best support them in their success and their health goals. There's so many different available options for you when you become a certified health coach. So check out IIN, check out the Institute for Integrative Nutrition, mention my name, get the best deal, give them a call and they'll give you lots of free information and help you to see if this is the right move for you. Classes are starting soon. The next round of classes are starting at the end of the month. So you're going to want to call them now and check it out. And if you know anyone in your life who would be an amazing coach, please tell them about it. Being a health coach is so rewarding and you get to help so many people.